the first person who's going to speak a little bit is Energy Arts Senior Instructor Erik Pieters. And he's going to tell us about what it was like to learn this set for Bruce Frantzis for the first time in 1982 in Denver. So I'm going to turn it over to Erik for a few minutes, and he can tell us about the origin of the wood exercise, which I think is what it was called back then. So Erik, you want to start us off here?
That's right. Back for the 3 years or so in Denver that I studied with Bruce, he used to do 5-element seasonal intensives over a weekend. He apparently did them for as much as a week long before I started showing up on the scene. But we would go to the school on a Friday night and practice or do things for several hours, spend the night there in the school because it was a protected space, and there was a Taoist altar and so on. And then we would get up at 5 in the morning and do several more hours and then come back in the evening. But we also sometimes would go out to some of the parks in Denver. And because he taught Qigong back then regularly and Tai Chi mostly, he used these seasonal intensives to primarily help get people to manifest and understand the energy of the season, often in an emotional context, but also sometimes in the context of something to practice with. So it was easy to fit it into the Qigong because of the 5 elements. And sometimes he did this mostly with standing, but in 1982, in the spring intensive, we ended up learning what was basically the beginning of the marriage of heaven and earth, which, as Danny noted, he called the wood exercise at the time. We learned basically, what you would know as the external movement, but the main emphasis when we were practicing it was we were out in one of the parks in Denver, and we were doing it with the trees, and he was very much into not only the wood element itself in the sense of expansion and growth, but also the emotional qualities of anger and to some extent the subliminal qualities of grief. And it was when the trees were beginning to bud out and the energy of spring in Colorado was very strong. And we were practicing with the trees, and it was a little different than what he's done later, where it's easy to stand or practice with a tree and get the sense of rooting down into the ground and reaching up to the sky. This had a stronger emotional context that he's never really done much with again. But we also, at one point during the thing, also focused on the idea of expansion in the body. And I didn't do Qigong, but in the Tai Chi form, we had to practice that several times, going through a series of getting a sense of expansion, and then getting a sense of the joints opening. Now, in that weekend, he didn't teach anything about how to open the joints, but he brought it up as a subject, possibly for the first time. It's hard for me to remember now. But on the subject of opening the joints, which is one of the central parts of the exercise, he later, when he was getting ready to close his school down and go back to Beijing to study with Liu in the spring of 1983, he said, I'm going to stop teaching you all these forms and teach you something that's important because you may never see me again. And he went through a systematic, just as he does in Heaven and Earth, but without the exercise, he went through opening and closing all the joints of the body, and then putting that into, in my case, the Chen Pan Ling Tai Chi form and the Yang style simplified 24-move form, which was the Tai Chi that he taught in Denver, and for the Qigong people into the Qigong. So before he left, we'd actually not only learned that the exercise itself, but began to play with opening and closing the joints.
Interesting. So you said that you guys would do these seasonal intensives all the time, and this was kind of the spring version?
That's right. Yeah, we did the 5 seasons, and he would, this one happened to be, I can tell from my notes, in early June, but he would about a month beforehand, he'd time it when he thought the energy of the season was really changing. And so it would be, well, we're going to do this maybe in about a month, and then he would keep talking, and then all of a sudden it might be, oh, it's going to happen this weekend. And then we would do whatever we did.
So when you got this sort of the wood exercise, this rudimentary version, how different was it from what we've all learned later on as the marriage of heaven and earth? I'm showing, this is just a coincidence, everybody, that Erik was at the school, I don't know, maybe that was even a couple years ago, and I took a bunch of pictures of him teaching heaven and earth. So it's only a coincidence that I have those pictures up with Erik speaking in the background here. So was it similar?
Externally, I don't know that it would be any different than what you would expect now. He didn't, with the only difference being that he did not really put bowing the spine into heaven and earth, at least whenever I took it from him, until the teacher training in 2004. So he used to do it with, maybe you lightly would bow your neck, but basically it involved bending and sort of pumping from the qua with a slight bend, but basically keeping the spine straight. And so other than that, it was the external movement was all basically the same thing.
I see. I see. And from the beginning, you guys were working on integrating it into the other practices as well, Xingyi and Tai Chi.
Yeah, but it was integrating that more the quality. Initially, it was trying to integrate that expansive quality of the wood energy. It was really more. It was more from the point of view of the energy of the element than from taking techniques or skills that are inherent in the practice of the heaven and earth exercise, and then putting them into Tai Chi or Bagua or Xingyi, or more advanced Qigong for that matter.